Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I thank you for joining us today for this learning series webinar, Fentanyl, What You Need to Know Now. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Partnership for a Drug Free New Jersey and is being held in collaboration with NJ Cares and the New Jersey Office of the Attorney General. And I thank them for their partnership, support, and collaboration on today's learning activity and throughout this year-long learning series. This webinar is also supported by the Drug Enforcement Administration New Jersey Division, and I thank them as well for their support today. I'm so pleased to introduce our featured expert speakers who are with us today for this very important conversation. Dr. Mehruba Paris, emergency physician and medical toxicologist at Rutgers University, New Jersey Medical School, University Hospital, and the New Jersey Poison Information and Education System. Welcome, Dr. Paris. Special Agent Timothy McMahon, Drug Enforcement Administration, New Jersey Division, and Marlon Williams, forensic epidemiologist for the New York, New Jersey High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, HIDTA, and the New Jersey Office of the Chief State Medical Examiner. I thank all of our expert panelists for being with us today. And now, Dr. Paris, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Angela, so much for the wonderful introduction and to everyone involved in organizing this very important event. So I'm here today to share with you a little bit about my knowledge on the medical aspects of fentanyl, and more specifically about its potency, clinical effects, and treatment. I hope you all find this information to be helpful. Next slide. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, we'll be covering the following. What is fentanyl? What's the epidemiology and scope of the problem? What's its pharmacology and relative potency? What are its clinical effects? How does it respond to naloxone, and a few other concerns. Next slide, please. I have nothing to disclose. Next slide. Okay, so fentanyl. So we normally group opioids into natural, semi-synthetic, and synthetics. Natural opioids, also known as opiates, are basically anything derived from the opium poppy, like codeine, morphine, and heroin. A lot of the prescribed opioids that we know, like oxy and hydrocodone, are semi-synthetic. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, so it's not derived from the poppy and it's not structurally similar to the natural opioids at all. Methadone and buprenorphine are other examples of synthetic opioids, to give you an example. And fentanyl, when it was created, manufactured, its actual FDA-approved use is as an analgesic in post-operative and cancer-related pain, as well as in multiple anesthesia techniques. It's very short-acting, has a time to effect based on the route of administration, can be 2.5 minutes to have its effect when given intranasally or immediately when used intravenously. And its duration of effect is also pretty short, lasting about 30 to 90 minutes. It is considered an ultra-potent opioid because it can be 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. And this picture here kind of gives you that in a visual sense. Next slide, please. So fentanyl can be administered in multiple ways: parenterally, so intravenous, intramuscular, transmucosally, sublingually, transdermally. When fentanyl is administered transmucosally or intravenously, it's absorbed very well. And the time it takes to reach its effect is very short, as I explained in the previous slide. It doesn't absorb as well when it's inhaled or through the skin. A really large amount is needed, and usually a special formulation like nebulization or atomization is required for it to be absorbed through the lungs. And dermal absorption is really difficult. It really only occurs through special formulation into a patch, as shown here on this slide. And even then, only a small percentage is absorbed, and it takes a really long time to reach its peak effect. Actually, it can take up to 3 to 6 days for it to reach its full effect when applied. Next slide, please.
Dr. Paris, I'm sorry, this is Angela.
Yeah.
I just want to interrupt you for a second. We're just getting some feedback about your sound. We're getting a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure if you can get closer to the microphone in any way.
Okay, you guys can hear me okay on your end?
It sounds much clearer now. Thank you.
Okay, okay. All right. I'm not sure what that was. Still okay? Is the sound still okay?
Yes, it sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Okay, all right. So given the primary focus of this webinar, I don't think this image is a surprise to most. This is a CDC figure on opioid and non-opioid drug overdose deaths from 1999 to 2019. So we can see, between 1999 to about 2012, things are more or less status quo. There's a baseline rate of death due to different illicit drugs, including, non-opioids, as I said. And then in 2012, we started seeing something very alarming. In the period between 2012 and 2015, there's a 264% increase in synthetic opioid-related deaths. And we unfortunately continue on that curve since. I think there's still some issue with the sound. Is that right?
No, I think you sound fine.
It's fine? Okay.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, very good. Okay, next slide, please. And then when we break it down further, looking only at opioid-related deaths, we can see that at the start of the opioid epidemic, we were seeing a rise in deaths related to mainly prescription opioids, shown here as the natural and semi-synthetic opioids over here in this blue line. So since then, although prescription rates have fallen, we started seeing the steepest rise and increase in deaths related to synthetic opioids. And this includes fentanyl, its analogs, such as carfentanil, and synthetic prescription opioids like tramadol. From the preliminary data, we also know that this rise has continued during the COVID-19 pandemic, and some have coined these terms, you might have heard, these concurrent events being called a twindemic. And in New Jersey, we have seen the biggest increase in emergency department visits due to opioid overdoses between 2019 and 2020. So because of these trends, some public health strategies were employed using fentanyl test strips. Some of you might have heard of that. They were distributed as a way to reduce overdoses. And some public health agencies and risk reduction groups initially using them in 2018, 2019, had pretty positive results where users basically tested their supply for fentanyl, did a test shot to see how strong, quote unquote, it was, and then used. But now there's way less utility in that because pretty much all of the users are assuming that there's fentanyl in the product that they're using, and sometimes this is desired. Some will come in to the emergency department saying, I'm using fentanyl or I used fentanyl. Next slide, please. So the prior figures really showed the trends in all age groups, but we're also seeing a rise in death rates related to fentanyl in the younger population. Many of you probably saw these headlines in the lay press last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, reporting an increase in opioid overdose deaths in adolescents, despite a decline in opioid use overall in that group. What seems to be driving this particular phenomenon is largely counterfeit pills, like this M30 pill here, where it's supposed to be Percocet. It might have an M30 stamp on it, it might not. And many of these pills actually contain fentanyl analogs, benzodiazepines, and other drugs. We're also seeing this happen in pills sold as party drugs and non-opioid drugs, being sold as Molly and MDMA. So just like contaminated illicit heroin, these pills made in drug labs by pill presses are driving this death rate in teens who often seek out pills in social settings, thinking they're actually safer. Next slide, please. So let's take a little turn and talk about how fentanyl produces its effects. So just like other opioids, such as heroin, oxycodone, etc., it acts in the body and mainly in the brain at 3 different opioid receptors, kappa, delta, and mu, producing different effects. The desirable effects, which when used recreationally in users who use fentanyl, comes mainly from its effect at the mu opioid receptor, so the euphoric and analgesic effects. Unfortunately, the undesirable effects mainly also come from its effect on the mu opioid receptor, so the dependence on the tolerance. And in overdose, the respiratory depression also comes from its effect on the mu opioid receptor, which is the driving force behind opioid-related deaths. Next slide, please. So in summary, in terms of the effects on fentanyl, when you combine the effects on the mu opioid receptor in an overdose scenario, you get a combination of severe sedation or loss of consciousness, pinpoint pupils, and respiratory depression. Next slide, please. And when overdoses do occur, thankfully, we have an antidote that reverses the effects of opioids very well, called naloxone. Some of you may know it as Narcan. It was first FDA approved in 1971 and has changed formulations a few times. It's a pure competitive opioid antagonist, mainly at the mu opioid receptor. It can be administered in multiple routes, the most common being intranasal administration by emergency medical services, law enforcement, and lay people. And the typical dose is about 0.04 to 0.4 milligrams given intravenously, or 2 to 4 milligrams given intranasally. And its effects last for about 30 to 90 minutes. So something to keep in mind in the age of synthetic opioids is that the effects of the opioid might be longer than the duration of effect of naloxone. So their symptoms might actually relapse when the naloxone wears off. And the other thing is, when using naloxone, we do have to worry about precipitating opioid withdrawal, especially in chronic users, which can be extremely unpleasant, and in rare cases, actually life-threatening, causing complications such as acute pulmonary edema, stress cardiomyopathy, and seizures. In the early years of the pandemic, there were also reports of fentanyl overdoses requiring extremely large amounts of naloxone to reverse, some as much as 10 to 30 times the normal or recommended dose. And since then, there have been multiple studies, and we're actually seeing that higher doses are not necessarily required. Your usual doses, as I described earlier, are enough in patients who have overdosed on fentanyl to reverse them effectively. Next slide, please. And finally, some of you may have also read and heard reports of bystanders, EMS, and law enforcement agents becoming intoxicated when in close proximity or contact with fentanyl. However, the symptoms that are reported in a majority of these cases are not those of opioid overdose. These include palpitations, chest pain, nausea, and dizziness, not sedation and respiratory depression like we would expect with opioids. So while there may be extraordinary exceptions, these reports are not consistent with medical effects of fentanyl or its pharmacology, as we went over earlier, in terms of its absorption and effect. So, caution should always be exercised as necessary when dealing with the unknown. But when it comes to potentially handling fentanyl, the American College of Medical Toxicology recommends basic protective equipment and techniques such as gloves and hand washing. And as a reminder, this is also what we do in the healthcare setting when we come in contact with fentanyl on our skin, which does not cause symptoms of opioid overdoses in healthcare providers. Next slide. And so in conclusion, fentanyl is an ultra-potent synthetic opioid causing the same constellation of symptoms as other opioids. The hallmark of an opioid overdose, and in turn fentanyl overdose, is sedation or unconsciousness, pinpoint pupils, and respiratory depression. Severe respiratory depression can progress to respiratory and ventilatory arrest, which may lead to death if not treated. Naloxone is an efficacious antidote in the reversal of fentanyl toxicity, and standard doses have been shown to be effective. And basic precautions should be used when potentially handling fentanyl-containing products. And again, thank you all for your attention, and another big thank you to the organizers.
Thank you, Dr. Paris. It was a really comprehensive presentation and really helped to see really the impact and, the strength of fentanyl. So I appreciate you being with us. I know there were a lot of questions for Dr. Paris, but we're going to hold those until all of our speakers have presented. But thank you again, Doctor. I will now turn the presentation over to Special Agent Tim McMahon from the DEA New Jersey. Welcome, Tim.
Good morning, and thank you for having me and having the DEA involved in this. Okay, next slide. Okay, just real quick, for those not familiar, DEA, federal agency, we enforce the federal drug laws for the United States. Main mission is to identify, investigate, disrupt, and dismantle drug trafficking organizations. Next. As you can see, we have offices all throughout the United States and also all around the world. So we're not just investigating here, but foreign as well. Next. Okay, so getting into it with fentanyl. I felt that we had to start off talking about the Mexican drug organizations. As you can see from this list, there's quite a few different Mexican drug cartels. The primary ones that we're dealing with are the Sinaloa and the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, the CJNG. They're probably the two most active drug cartels that are supplying most of the United States with the illegal drugs. Most of them are what we refer to as polydrug, meaning that they're not just involved in one type of drug, but multiple in order to maximize their profit. Next. Okay, you can see from this map, the orange represents the Sinaloa cartel and the yellow, the CJNG. So you can see pretty much most of the United States is controlled by those two, with, again, the vast majority, and in our area up here in the Northeast is being supplied by the Sinaloa cartel. Next. Okay, so with overdose deaths last year, across the country, we experienced almost 108,000. That's the largest number that the country has ever experienced. Of those 108,000, 66% involve synthetic opioids, primarily fentanyl, and 26 involve psychostimulants, primarily methamphetamine. So you can see what a huge role that fentanyl is now playing today. And you can see kind of how the opioid epidemic has evolved over the years, where it went from abuse of the prescription medications, transition to heroin, where now pretty much fentanyl has taken over and is responsible for a vast majority of the overdose deaths. Next. So with the almost 108,000, that equates to approximately 195 people dying every day from a fentanyl or opioid overdose. That's pretty astounding. And overall, with all overdose deaths, that's 295 people every day. That would be the equivalent of a 757 airliner crashing and killing everybody on board every single day. That's how many people are dying in the United States every day. Next. Okay, so what is fentanyl? Doctor pretty much went over that. What we're seeing generally with the overdose deaths, approximately 2 milligrams of fentanyl is enough to cause a fatal overdose. And obviously that's going to fluctuate a little bit based on a person's body mass, how long they've been using, whether or not they've built up a tolerance. They can handle a little bit more. What we're finding with a lot of the overdose deaths related to the counterfeit pills, which I'll get into in a minute, is people trying these pills for the first time. They think they're taking an oxy, but they're actually taking a tablet that contains fentanyl. And that one time, unfortunately, is the only time they take it, because unfortunately, a lot of times it leads to a fatal overdose. Next slide. And here you can see approximately 2 milligrams wouldn't even cover the tip of the pencil. That's how little is required. Next. Different types of fentanyl. Primarily what we see in our investigations here at DEA is the white powder or counterfeit pills that contain fentanyl. Black tar, we really don't see much east of the Mississippi. That's primarily out in the western part of the United States. Then you have the medical forms, pharmaceutical, the derivatives or analogs, different types of fentanyl. And then what a lot of these drug organizations do is they'll use different types of food coloring to change the color of the fentanyl powder. They do that primarily as a marketing tool. So if they just say they dye a particular batch pink, and the people on the street buying it, they get a good high off of it, they're going to start spreading the word around that, hey, you want to start looking for pink. It's a way to drive up their sales and again, primarily used as a marketing tool. Next. How is it abused? Like many other drugs, injected, snorted, sniffed, smoked, taken orally by pill, spiked onto blotter paper. The blotter paper, as far as I know here at DEA in New Jersey, we really haven't come across that. But again, a lot of the people that are injecting, snorting, aren't really aware that what they're doing is snorting or injecting fentanyl. They may think that they're using heroin, but unfortunately, it very much, a lot of times, is tainted with fentanyl. Next. Origins of fentanyl, and we're not talking about the medical grade. This is the illicit fentanyl. Primarily, the vast majority that we're seeing here in the United States is coming, again, from the Mexican drug organizations. They're receiving the precursor chemicals to manufacture the fentanyl from China. India is starting to get into that now as well, sending the precursor chemicals to Mexico. And then the organizations in Mexico are converting the chemicals into the powder fentanyl or the counterfeit pills. And a lot of people ask, well, why would these organizations want to get involved with fentanyl with the potential of killing off their customer base? And when you get down to it, it just comes down to pure profit. Here in the United States, a drug trafficker can purchase a kilo of fentanyl for usually on average from $50,000 to $60,000. When they break that down for individual resale or press it into tablets, that could bring them a profit of approximately $1.5 million. So that $60,000 investment will bring them $1.5 million. That's why they're doing it. And again, going off of that 2 milligram potential fatal dose, 1 kilogram has the potential to kill upwards of 500,000 people and also to produce 500,000 counterfeit pills. Next. The fentanyl flow into the United States. You can see the map here. Again, just kind of goes over what I said, coming from China to Mexico and up into the United States. Next. Domestic fentanyl use. On this map, the darker colors you can see are primarily east of the Mississippi River. Traditionally, the eastern part of the United States has been more involved in heroin and opioid use than the western half of the country. And you can see New Jersey kind of falls right in the middle. These represents the deaths per 100,000 people. So New Jersey falls right in the range of about 4.5 to 16 people per 100,000 dying from domestic fentanyl use. Next. Counterfeit prescription pills. This is one of the biggest problems that we're facing today, where a lot of DEA's investigations are focused. You can see from the bar graph there, this is the amount of pills that DEA has seized over the last couple of years. And you can see the big increase from 2019, where we seized approximately 2.5 million counterfeit pills, to 2021, where it was 9.6. So you can see that number almost quadrupled in 2 years. So the Mexican organizations are flooding the United States with these counterfeit pills. Next slide, please. Again, the doctor touched on this with the counterfeit pills. It's very difficult for the people that are either purchasing these on the street or ordering them through the internet, where they think that they're ordering oxys. They may actually be getting these counterfeit pills, and it's very, very difficult for them to tell the difference because the pill presses they're using are leaving the same exact stamps on the pills, on the tablets that the legitimate pharmaceuticals have. So a lot of times the customer has absolutely no idea. Next. And the record quantities of fentanyl that DEA seized in 2021 are enough to kill every single American. Again, from a couple slides ago, we seized approximately 9.5 million tablets, but total between the tablets and powder, we seized more than 15,000 pounds of fentanyl. You know, definitely more than enough, as the slide shows, to kill every single person in the country. Next. And again, the labs that they're using to produce these, this is a photo of a legitimate medical grade pharmaceutical laboratory where there's oversight, you know, all the lab regulations that go with that. That's not what we're talking about with these counterfeit pills. Next. A lot of times this is where these pills are being produced, in the middle of the jungle somewhere. You know, isolated areas down in Mexico, no oversight, no cleanliness. You know, they're just doing whatever they have to do to mix the chemicals to produce the fentanyl. Next. This is a photo of some fentanyl pills that were seized by DEA. You can see where the arrow was pointing, just that little section there. That's all those little bags, blue bags. It's approximately 1.2 million fentanyl pills. Next. Okay, what this is showing is the percentage of tablets containing 2 milligrams or more of fentanyl. Again, 2 milligrams being that kind of average dose that potentially could be fatal. So we're seeing about 42%. So from every 10 pills that DEA seizes that contains fentanyl, 4 out of 10 of them contain 2 milligrams or more. So that would be like going into, say, going into Starbucks and the barista setting up 10 coffees on the counter, telling you there's cyanide in 4 of them. Good luck making the right choice. That's what's happening with these pills. Again, when the people are buying these pills, it's really playing a game of Russian roulette. Next. Okay, and then the average fentanyl dose in the tablets, again, 2.2 milligrams now, which is just a touch over that 2 milligram dose. So the amount of fentanyl in each of these tablets is increasing. Next. And I'd like to use a chocolate chip analogy. You know, when you eat a chocolate chip cookie, 1 cookie may contain 3 chocolate chips, 1 may contain 10. That's the same thing when people are purchasing these tablets, is there's no way to know how much fentanyl is in there. Next. And now we're dealing with, again, the ease of access. People ordering pills through the internet. They think that they're ordering oxys or ordering Adderall, you know, and they're getting these counterfeit tablets. We've heard so many stories, and the news has done so many stories about students, college students buying these pills and unfortunately dying from a fatal overdose. Next. And then if things weren't hard enough, now we're finding that these different drug organizations are using various strings of emojis for make it very easy for people to very discreetly order different types of pills through the different messaging apps. Next. And then I just want to touch on this. This is something that DEA is paying a lot of attention to. We're starting to see what's called isotonitazine. Next. We really haven't seen much, if any, here in New Jersey, referred to as iso or tony. Again, it's a synthetic opioid more potent than heroin or morphine and similar in potency to fentanyl. It was first identified in 2019, primarily in the Midwestern part of the country. But in recent years, it's moved into the southern and eastern part of the United States. Next. It's listed as a Schedule I. Again, primary source is China. And it looks like the risk of overdose death increases when ISO is combined with fentanyl. And then they're also seeing that a typical dose of naloxone or Narcan is ineffective, countering the overdose symptoms related to ISO. Usually multiple doses of naloxone may be required. Next. And because of everything going on, DEA launched a One Pill Can Kill campaign. You can check the website there for more information. But we're trying to get the word out to the public on how dangerous these pills can be. You know, we tell people you have to assume that if somebody is offering you a pill, you have to assume that it's counterfeit. If it's not something that was directly prescribed for you and came from a pharmacy and it's your medication and you're getting it from a friend or you're buying it on the street, you have to assume it's a counterfeit pill today. It's just too much risk involved to take that chance. Next. I know that was quick. That's what I have. That's my contact info. You know, if anybody has any other info, or I'm sorry, any other questions, you can feel free to reach out. But again, thank you to the Partnership for Drug-Free New Jersey for putting this on and for involving DEA. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Really great presentation. And I know I'm not alone when I say that your examples really helped to clarify just how dangerous this drug is. So appreciate that. I know there are some questions for you, but we'll wait until we get to the end to send those your way. Next, I am going to turn the presentation over to Marlon Williams. Marlon, welcome.
Hey, good morning, Angela, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. So as was mentioned, my name is Marlon Williams. I'm the forensic epidemiologist here at the Office of the Chief State Medical Examiner. And on behalf of Dr. Falzone, who is the Chief State Medical Examiner, the Office of the Chief State Medical Examiner, and the New Jersey Department of Health, I'll be presenting on overdose deaths in New Jersey, locking in on fentanyl. This will be a statistical approach to what New Jersey is looking like. Next slide, please. So with this slide, I'd like to illustrate what the trend so far from 2015 all the way up until 2022 is looking like. It's important to know before I continue further, any information from 2020, 21, and 22 are all suspected, and they will become verified as cases become confirmed. However, from what you can see for the purposes of this presentation, 2015 to 16 shows the sharpest incline in fentanyl involved in overdose deaths, representing about 96%. And then as you advance all the way to 2018, 19, 20, you start to see a plateau in the lower 2000s. 2021, you start to see a slight dip of about 8%. But again, once cases become verified, I suspect those latter years to change, and unfortunately, they may increase. And one thing to also note with 2022, that represents from January 1st of this year all the way until May 31st of this current year. Next slide, please. Now, something unique about this slide, it's almost an exact replication of the previous slide, but the numbers on top of each bar represents the total overdose deaths for each year. Again, with 20, 21, and 22 being suspected overdoses. Each of these boxes are filled with a volume of red, indicating what the threat, what the, the lethal effects of fentanyl have been within these overdose deaths. So more specifically, looking at 2018, where it starts to getting about 3/4 of the total overdose deaths, you start seeing these boxes are nearly quite filled, and it gives you a key idea of how severe fentanyl has been in our drug landscape. So far for 2022, right now, with about 1,247 deaths, 45% of them involved fentanyl, and those numbers again are subjected to change and unfortunately will continue to rise. Next slide, please. I wanted to break everything down by race, but first, give an idea with the overall drug overdose deaths, locking in on 2021, the most recent year. So as you can see towards the left hand of the slide, the white demographic totally dominates total overdose deaths. But when you even things out in per capita rates per 100,000, now the Black population begins to emerge as the population that is more susceptible to overdose deaths in New Jersey. And this is something I have been seeing year after year, honestly, from about 2019 onwards. So it's definitely important to keep my eyes on this, as the Black population does seem to be most susceptible so far at increasing rates. Next slide, please. Now, locking in on fentanyl, this display also pretty much replicates the previous slide. The white demographic, as you can see on the left hand of the screen, dominates total overdose deaths. But when you break everything down by per capita rates, the Black demographic triumphs over again with fentanyl-involved overdose deaths. And you start to see that the Hispanic population sort of levels out rate-wise to the white population as well. Next slide, please. And simply in this slide, I have a breakdown of age and gender. Just a key take back from this would be the age group 31 to 40 for both male and female dominates total overdose deaths involving fentanyl, while the others 51 to 60 and 41 to 50 follows appropriately with fentanyl involved overdose deaths. Next slide, please. Now, one thing that you will get to notice about me, I love illustrating the drug landscape of New Jersey in maps, just to get a better idea of what areas seem to be most susceptible, especially with fentanyl-involved overdose deaths. Towards the left, everything is represented by total counts, whilst the map on the right is broken down by rates. So concentrating on the left side of this slide first, you will see that Essex County and Camden counties both are in the darkest blue. As colors are more dark, the density of overdoses are higher. And as the colors get lighter, the density of overdoses tend to decrease. Essex County and Camden counties stick out like a sore thumb on the left-hand side. Whereas when you break everything down to rates and adjust for population total and size, now you start to see on the right-hand side of the screen, Southern New Jersey begins to light up, well, more rather get darker in shades of blue with overdose deaths. Now, unfortunately, Camden still remains a susceptible county, but now you start seeing counties like Atlantic, Cumberland, Cape May, Salem, and even Gloucester counties become relevant counties of concern that should also keep their eyes on. Next slide, please. And with this slide, I was able to break down each of the top three demographics, the white population, Black population, and Hispanic population that came up statistically significant for overdose deaths. Now, adjusting for population side for each specific demographic, as you could see, Southern New Jersey appears to be the common trend between all three. However, if you pay attention to the Black demographic in the middle, that map seems to be the darkest overall, despite, the Southern New Jersey being the most abundant. And as I was advancing through this, counties that I never honestly paid attention to heavily in the past, such as Sussex and Warren counties, or even Somerset counties, start to make itself relevant when adjusted for population side for the Black demographic. But this all goes hand in hand towards the rates, overdose rates increasing for the Black demographic, especially considering fentanyl. Next slide, please. And as we talk about fentanyl, it's also important to mention its analogs. So some analogs are produced by pharmaceutical companies, which will be non-illicit, but typically in the drug environment in New Jersey, you will get the illicit substances that are chemically similar to fentanyl. And it may differ from one or more chemical components, which will alter the substance's chemical profile. And when that chemical profile is altered, the potency takes a hit. Its effects could, heighten, which makes the substance even more dangerous, as I'll discuss in the next slide. One of the most important substances that we've noticed here at the Office of the Chief State Medical Examiner has been PARA-FLUOROFENTNAYL. We've been keeping a close eye on it. It's an analog of fentanyl, and its potency is 16 times that of morphine, but 30% of fentanyl. However, the lethal dose, which is the LD50, which measures toxicity of a substance, is lower than fentanyl and morphine. So this simply means that PARA-FLUOROFENTNAYL has a more lethal effect. And towards the bottom of this slide, I know Dr. Paris did a phenomenal job explaining the chemical profiles. So I'm an epidemiologist by trade. I'm taking my shot at toxicology. So the mu, kappa, and delta receptors on the left-hand side of the screen are what it looks like for fentanyl. However, you see the delta and the kappa receptors change positions when transgress into PARA-FLUOROFENTNYLs. And as Dr. Paris mentioned before, the mu receptor mainly induces euphoria and motivation and dependence. However, with kappa and delta, they're more of inhibitory with a pain response. But with delta, an important thing to lock in on is it improves negative emotional states, sort of an antidepressant effect. So the importance of the chemical profile changing is you understand the more lethal effects that PARA-FLUOROFENTNYL will take on to a user, making it more addictive and take on a stronger hit compared to fentanyl, proving more danger to its users. Next slide, please. And with this slide, I wanted to give a look at from when we first started tracking PARA-FLUOROFENTNYL up until about, May of this year, what it's looking like. So as you can see, that 50 stands out like a sore thumb at about that February, January mark of this year, unfortunately. And with these numbers, labs are still testing. We are still getting results back. We're still identifying decedents that may have perished due to PARA-FLUOROFENTNYL. So these numbers are certainly subjected to increase, unfortunately. As you see, 2021, there was 324 suspected cases and rising. And so far in 2022, there has been 126 cases and still rising. I would honestly ignore that 11 around April of this year. That number has been fluctuating consistently. But of course, as information becomes more available, I could easily get those numbers out to those who are interested. Next slide, please. And lastly, just to get an understanding of where we are seeing PARA-FLUOROFENTNYL. So again, similar to the other maps that I displayed earlier, the darker regions indicate a higher density of descendants that died in a particular area due to the substance. And as it gets lighter, the density, lightens up and decreases. Essex County sticks out like a sore thumb, unfortunately, once again. And you also see Atlantic County with central New Jersey also making an appearance, and Cumberland and Cape May as well. Just because other counties represent lighter colors does not mean we're not seeing it there. If this substance is particularly new, just like when fentanyl was first discovered, once labs become more privy to a substance, they will be able to test. Now they know what to look for. Now they know what to identify. And that's how numbers begin to fluctuate and increase, especially as awareness builds up on a particular substance. And this is my last and final slide. I appreciate the opportunity to present to everybody. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me separately in my email address or during the Q&A session. And thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Marlon. That was a really great presentation and really helped shine a light on what we're seeing here in New Jersey. Before I go to the questions, I know there's been a lot of feedback about whether there'll be copies of these slides available. So the answer is yes, everyone will receive a link to the slides as well as a recording of today's presentation. So just wanted to mention that before we move forward. Dr. Paris, I'm going to go ahead and give the first question to you, but Tim and Marlon, you may want to jump in on this as we move forward after Dr. Paris speaks about it. Dr. Paris, can you speak to the links about prescribed opioid to fentanyl use? Is there a pattern that you're seeing in your patients? And are you seeing fentanyl overdose death contribute to first-time fentanyl users?
Okay, thanks for the question. So just so I know I understood the question, you're asking about in the clinical setting. So when I'm working in the emergency department, what am I seeing in terms of patterns of fentanyl use? And as it relates to first-time users,
exactly, and what you're seeing in patterns of fentanyl use, and also what you're seeing in with your patients in how they have progressed to fentanyl use, or are they is an accidental overdose, or are they buying things on the internet that they're sharing with you?
Yeah. So I think, Marlon and Tim also alluded to this as well. Right now, any illicit substance that people are using have the potential of being laced with fentanyl. So I have a range and gamut of patients showing up to the emergency department, longtime heroin users who have now, transitioned to fentanyl use because that is what's in the supply and they have learned how to use it, but they're in the emergency department, so there's a reason why they're there. So either an overdose or some sort of, toxicity from their batch. So there's, longtime opioid users coming in with what is presumed to be a fentanyl overdose. There are patients that over, the course of the last few years have transitioned from prescription over to heroin and now are using fentanyl because that's what's in the supply. And then we have a large amount of patients as well showing up with, they thought they were using cocaine, or they thought they took a pill of Molly or MDMA, but the effects they are presenting with are signs and symptoms of opioid overdose, and everything has fentanyl in it now, so it's presumed fentanyl. So it's really a range that we're seeing.
Thanks. And it's true. I know, Tim and Marlon, I'm going to bring this question to you as well. Tim, I know you gave us some examples of different drugs that have been combined with fentanyl, but can you elaborate on that a bit and discuss some of the trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, sure. As the doctor said, we're starting to see fentanyl in everything. When teens order what they think is Adderall online, a lot of times it's just pure meth. And a lot of times fentanyl is mixed in with that. If you remember the story from a couple months ago during spring break with the cadets from West Point down in Florida, they were doing cocaine, but they overdosed because of the fentanyl that was involved in it. We're starting to see fentanyl in everything. Not so much, get a lot of questions about fentanyl in marijuana. Here in New Jersey, I don't know of any cases where that's happened. I know, I think it was in the fall of last year, Connecticut had a confirmed case where a couple girls overdosed who were smoking marijuana, and the marijuana that was tested contained fentanyl, but they don't know if that was deliberate or if that was some type of cross-contamination. But yes, we are starting to see, even in the cocaine, methamphetamine that DEA seizes here in New Jersey, when we send it to lab for testing, it's also testing positive for fentanyl.
Thanks, Tim. And Marlon, I know you touched on this as well, but can you elaborate on some of the trends that you're seeing in overdoses and other
Yeah, certainly, Angela. So like Tim has mentioned, from what I've been seeing with the overdose deaths, primarily in 2019, when I first started noticing a sharp increase, fentanyl has been combined with heroin, cocaine, and we've been seeing it in the decedents. Methamphetamine as of recently. However, that initial jump from 2017 to 18, where it was very remarkable, about 55% of decedents, about 74% of decedents represented in 2018 perished due to fentanyl, compared to all the overdose deaths we were seeing in Jersey. That's when it became a scary thing to witness. It's a drug deaths include multi substances, and it's not just one substance anymore, and it's typically going to involve fentanyl in some shape, form, or fashion.
All right, thanks. And Marlon, just we're getting a lot of questions. Is there a significant difference from what you're seeing in male and female patients? And Dr. Paris, if you could jump in after Marlon.
Yeah, so there is a significant difference, and that would have been certainly something interesting to display for you guys. But I've been seeing there's a sharp difference between males and females. Males are overdosing largely greater than females from fentanyl-involved overdose deaths. However, all put together, both genders, it's both an issue. Both genders are overdosing compared to the rest of the substances by far from fentanyl completely. But males typically do perish with fentanyl overdose deaths compared to females in a greater accordance.
And
Go ahead,
thank you, Marlon. Yeah, from that. And in the clinical in the clinical arena in the emergency department, we're seeing a lot of males and females. But I agree with you; it's the same trend in terms of there's more males to females, but it is definitely not far from each other, and we are seeing a significant amount in both.
Thanks, Dr. Paris. Tim, not sure if that's a trend that you guys are tracking, if you have anything you want to add to that question.
Yeah, I don't, as far as I know from DEA stats, have anything on that. I just agree with what both said, that typically the numbers would be higher for males.
Thanks. And Tim, you mentioned purchasing pills on the internet. We have a lot of questions on if you could explain how the difference between illegal purchasing on the internet and legal purchasing on the internet. There seems to be some confusion on that.
Sure. Well, you have your legitimate internet pharmacies, which the operators of those has a DEA registration number. The person ordering it would still have to get a legitimate prescription from their physician, and then go about whatever the procedure for the website is to order it to get the legitimate pharmaceutical prescription. For the illegal drugs, which I kept referring to students and teens, there's various places on the internet. You can go through the dark web. It's kind of like the underground internet, to order all different types of illegal narcotics. As I mentioned, social media. People are ordering through different social media accounts, and having the pills sent directly either to their home. What people do a lot of times, if they know a neighbor has moved but the house hasn't sold yet, they'll have something delivered to the house next door, and then go and pick up the package there once it's delivered. So there's a variety of ways that it's being done. And again, sometimes the pills are coming when the order is placed, are coming straight over from China. Other times there are drug traffickers here in the United States that get the powder and are pressing it themselves into the pills, and shipping it via the U.S. Postal Service. So just a variety of methods. The people that are looking to order them are very resourceful. So I mean, really, parents really need to pay attention to what their kids and other members of the house are ordering. Check the accounts. You know, I always tell parents, stay up on top of what your kids are doing on social media, just to try and get a handle on it. I know it's difficult, but you know, you have to do everything that we can do.
Thanks, Tim. So I know we're coming to the end of our time. I just want to go back to our panelists with one last question. If there's one point that you would like to leave our attendees with today, what would that be? One message on some steps they can do or something they should know. Dr. Paris, we'll start with you.
So one takeaway message from our end would really be, you know, fentanyl and all of these fentanylogs that we're seeing and all of these novel, you know, psychoactive agents, they are all contaminated with multiple things. And to really be vigilant on the kinds of effects that we end up seeing, whether it be opioid, whether it be signs and symptoms of a true opioid toxicity or not. But there is a potential for drug-related toxicity with any of these products at this point. And with fentanyl, it's going to be an evolving landscape, and we don't know what we're going to see tomorrow, really. So to be vigilant about that.
Thank you, Doctor. And Tim, last comments?
Sure. For parents, it's so vitally important to keep that open line of communications open between themselves and their children. Have open discussions about drug use. Find out what their kids know about drugs being used in the schools that they attend. You know, I think sometimes people think we overblow this a little bit with how little fentanyl is needed as a scare tactic. But again, we've just heard too many stories of somebody ordering a pill for the first time and taking that first pill and dying from an overdose. So, you know, they have to have these conversations with their kids and make them understand how dangerous it is by taking a pill that wasn't directly prescribed to them.
Thanks so much, Tim. And Marlon, for our closing comment.
Yeah, certainly. Not to be dramatic or anything, because I do come off as that sometimes, but substances these days, what I could see from my stats, honestly, 3/4 of the time are going to have fentanyl in it. And honestly, if so little of that substance can push the typical drug user or even the novice drug user overboard to perish, that's something to certainly keep an eye on, especially as numbers continue to rise. Numbers are going to steadily increase until we could figure out a way to combat it from where the substances are coming from. So once again, no substance out there is safe. There's going to be a 3/4 of a chance that it's going to be laced with some fentanyl or fentanyl analog.
No, thanks for that. And I think that's overall what I got from all of your presentations, that there is so much risk out there regarding fentanyl. There's no substance that is kind of safe from possibly containing fentanyl. So appreciate you sharing that and all of your data. Appreciate all of our expert panelists sharing their perspectives and all of our attendees who've stayed on with us. And who have submitted such great questions, and for joining this conversation. We have some information on an upcoming webinar in July on the role of medication in fighting the opioid crisis, and I invite you to attend that. I hope that you'll join us. Again, I want to thank all of our panelists. Your presentations were excellent. I know that there's a lot of questions that came into the chat that we didn't get to give to our panelists. So we'll definitely think about doing a part 2 on this conversation. And if you have any questions that you need an answer to, please email them to us, and we'll make every effort we can to get you those answers. But once again, thank you everyone for being with us. Again, thank you to our expert panelists, and be well, everyone. Have a good day.